Back out. Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network is with us.
Tom is joining us. And
hey, Tom.
Thanks to Tom, anytime we get a guest via the NFL Network, our man Andrew Howard helps hook it up. You can see Tom on NFL Network. He's one of their NFL insiders, and you can check out all the NFL games on NFL.com plus this year, so make sure you guys check out that. Tom, thanks for making UCSS debut today, man. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great, Tom. It's good to have you with us. And, earlier in the show, we were talking about the Aaron Donald situation in camp. I'm of the belief that if Myles Garrett gets a 6-game suspension, so should Aaron Donald. These guys disagree because it's practice. To me, it's the intent. What's the difference if it's practice or not? I thought Myles Garrett's suspension personally was too long. I would have given him 3 games. But and the league's not going to do anything. What do you think about it?
Well, the league, based upon its policies, does not interfere with practices, including joint practices. Discipline has always been handled by the clubs in those cases. We've seen a lot of fights through the years in joint practices as well as just in normal practices, punches thrown. There have been other occasions where guys pull off a helmet and swing it around. I certainly understand where the video that ended up going viral yesterday of Aaron Donald certainly swinging a helmet and apparently hitting someone at least once, maybe twice, at one point having 2 helmets in his hand. It's not a good look. I mean, there's no question about that, but clubs are responsible for discipline in these cases. Yeah. Now, can the NFL try to influence what the Rams may do or not do with Aaron Donald? I think the other, absolutely, the league is going to have an interest in that. I think it's also important to understand here, we've got whatever this is, a 20-second clip from practice, and this is not in any way to excuse, Aaron Donald swinging around a helmet and trying to hit people with it. But the reality is, in games, not only are there way, way more people watching than are watching on a Twitter video or anything else, but the NFL has a continuous stream of all these different cameras from a bunch of different angles and can go back and see, what led up to it, exactly what took place here. In practice, you're really limited to now, again, the clubs could pull the video that they have from practice and you could get a little bit better feel for it. But in this case, we're working off of what, one small video there. It's a more complicated process, and it's one that the league historically has always left to clubs. So, fair to say it's unlikely that Aaron Donald is going to face discipline here.
Tom, are you surprised, considering how you mentioned it? There's fights in these joint practices all the time. Things get tense. These teams just played in the Super Bowl, so there's probably already a lot of bad blood. Are you surprised these two teams got together here, or no big deal, even though they were in the Super Bowl?
No, because it's Sean McVay and Zach Taylor have a history, and Zach was on Sean's staff out there in L.A., so not a surprise there. I do think that there's a fair evaluation on multiple levels of the way that things are set up now. Remember, we went down from 4 preseason games to 3. A couple of years ago, we didn't have preseason games at all because of the pandemic, but teams got different ideas about being able to utilize these joint practices increasingly to get additional work. And that this year in particular has led to a lot of those teams that had the joint practices then didn't play any of their starters in the preseason games. Roger Goodell has been very forward with the fact that he doesn't think that the preseason is the best product that the NFL puts on the field, which is, of course true, but a ton of people watch it. Your average NFL Network rerun of a preseason game from a few days earlier is going to outrate a lot of other sporting events on TV. That's just the reality of it. But the fact that increasingly you're seeing joint practices, in essence, replace preseason games, does the league look into different things that they can do with that? Are there different, regulations that they want to put into place in terms of the settings for these, in terms of the organization? All those things probably have to get looked at because, and I'm going off the top of my head here, what did we have, 20 joint practices, and there were probably videos of, fights in a dozen of them. It was a fairly common thing, and this is a particularly bad example. So I would fully anticipate, like with everything, the NFL will examine how these are being used and whether there's different protocols that should be put into place.
Tom, I'm going to keep it in the AFC North. Lamar Jackson with the Ravens, do you think that they get the deal done, or do you think this will be kind of the last year we'll see him in a Ravens uniform?
Well, I don't think it's going to be the last season we see him in a Ravens uniform because they've got a couple of franchise tags that they can use beyond this season. And that's where Lamar Jackson is in, kind of a unique spot here where he's much closer. He's played out his rookie deal. Not many franchise quarterbacks, certainly not guys who've won the MVP, play out their 5th-year option, which is he is about to do if they don't get this deal done, but they still have 2 more years in essence of team control because those franchise tags are cost controlled until you would get to a third one, which is an astronomical number. Is he willing to play the entire thing out? Is he willing to go through 2022, 23, and 24, and then be in a position like what Kirk Cousins was, where you get into unfettered free agency and all that brings? You're talking about taking on a ton of injury risk. You're talking about time value of money. He's making a lot more money than he was making a year ago because the fifth-year option is worth $20+ million. Last year he was making, I think it's like $3 million or something like that. So if he was willing to play for that small number last year, he's going to play for this number too. But it's a unique situation also because he doesn't have an agent. No agent that I know would have let him go on the field last year as a former NFL MVP and played for as little money as he did. They would have pushed to get the deal done. Lamar played out that season. He certainly is acting like he's willing to play out this season as well. But keep an eye on this all the way up to potentially the day before their opener. There have been a lot of deals historically that when you have a deadline at the start of the regular season, they go all the way down to that Saturday or that Sunday before they actually get done.
So, Tom, we're on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, so let's get to the meat and potatoes. What do you think about these Browns over here?
Browns are a very talented football team. I did make it through there in camp. It happened to be the day that Deshaun Watson's initial 6-game suspension came down, so I probably didn't see as much practice as I would have otherwise seen on that particular day. But, I think Andrew Berry made one of the shrewd moves of the offseason, acquired Amari Cooper for a 5th-round draft pick, which in hindsight, when you look at what other receivers were going for, is remarkable value, and they were willing to take on that $20 million salary. They've obviously got a couple of backs who are really good. They're stacked at tight end. Their offensive line has been a strength for that football team. And then they got a ton of talented guys on defense, starting out with Myles Garrett. It all comes down to, in football terms, the quarterback position. They now have clarity on the fact they're not going to have Deshaun Watson for the first 11 games of this season. It's going to be a different type of a process because Deshaun will be back in the building in October. He can be practicing in November. And meanwhile, barring an additional acquisition, it's going to be Jacoby Brissett starting for that period of time. Brissett has started under difficult circumstances before. He's somebody who's played in the league. The knock on Brissett has really just been, he doesn't always see it and rip it. He's a little bit risk averse in terms of getting the football out. But on a team that's going to revolve very much around Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt and that running game, it's not the worst thing to have somebody who at least is going to take care of the football, especially because part of the reason, and it was just one of the reasons that Baker Mayfield, they decided to move on from him ultimately, was the fact that there were times where they thought he was too loose with the football, was giving it away when they're built really to pound it, run the football, play good defense, and make enough plays in the passing game.
Tom, I've been yelling at the clouds for over a week now to go get Jimmy G. They have one viable NFL quarterback on the roster, and he's a backup as far as I'm concerned. What's the future of Jimmy Garoppolo, and where do you think ultimately he lands? I mean, at this point, if a team was going to come get him, I'd imagine the trade would have been made by now. I'm assuming the Niners are going to release him in a couple of days. Tell me if I'm wrong, and then where ultimately you think he lands.
Well, the 49ers are going to play this out till the last possible minute, whether they perceive that to be next Tuesday at the 53-man cutdown, or they perceive that to be the Tuesday before week 1, where then he would have his salary be locked in for that week. Is it the Saturday where it would become fully guaranteed for the season? I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it, but they've been, sitting there and trying to be patient in a tough deal with the shoulder surgery and seeing whether something shakes loose around the league. I mean, there's definitely, I would anticipate something is happening here, yes, in the coming days. But part of the issue with bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo to a situation like Cleveland is you don't necessarily know that Jimmy Garoppolo can go play at the start of the season. He's throwing it. Everyone I've talked to says he's got good velocity on the football, but there's a difference between throwing the ball on the side in practice and actually going out and throwing on the move and throwing across your body and having to move in the pocket and all those types of things. And also just building up the tolerance in your shoulder to throw as much as NFL quarterbacks do in the course of a given week or a given game. That's not to say Jimmy Garoppolo can't be ready to start week 1, but it's part of the evaluation process that, hey, we haven't seen this guy even practice, much less play in a game since he underwent the shoulder surgery. So if you're the Browns and you're going, we just need a guy for 11 games. Number one, does Jimmy Garoppolo want to go into that situation knowing that he's ultimately going to be replaced in December? And number two, if of those 11 games, Garoppolo only is ready to play 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever it might be, it's just a really difficult type of a trade to do. That doesn't mean it won't happen. But I think it's probably fair to say that it's more likely at this point that the Browns could become involved if, in fact, Jimmy Garoppolo does end up getting released.
Can teams get any sort of assurance on what you were just talking about, that he's ready to throw under these circumstances? Like, I don't know. I mean, you expect the 49ers to be honest with you about how he looks in camp? Like, what sort of assurance, or are teams just sort of firing blind on him?
If the 49ers want to trade him, they're going to have to. I mean, they certainly would already give access to his scans and everything else, but there's been plenty of situations through the years where you go in and work somebody out. Joe Montana years ago went in and worked out for the Chiefs before they ended up with him. I mean, there's plenty of those occasions. It's just, you're right up against the start of the season here. He's also got to learn an offense. He's got to learn a scheme. There's a lot of different, complicated parts of it. Absolutely. If somebody were willing to offer the 49ers something for Jimmy Garoppolo, they would do whatever it takes to ensure that trade can happen. But, again, at this stage, it's such a difficult type of a trade to do. We'll see whether something comes together. And, of course, we've still got some preseason games here where there's a bunch of starting quarterbacks around the league that are playing. There's a bunch of backup quarterbacks that are playing. There's something all of a sudden shake loose, Teddy Bridgewater style at the last second here. We'll find out.
Tom, we've talked a lot about on this show about the trade rumors involving Kareem Hunt. I hate the idea of the Browns trading Kareem Hunt unless they somehow could get a top 25 receiver, which is obviously, well, at least I think it's impossible. I don't like the idea of trading him for a draft pick or some, random third wide receiver. I don't know. Do you think? I think that's the Browns' strength. As long as Jacoby Brissett's the quarterback, it's having two elite running backs that nobody else really does. Do you expect Kareem Hunt to get traded?
I would fairly say, based on my understanding, it's unlikely that Kareem Hunt gets traded, but not impossible. We know that he wants to get paid a lot of money to play that position. There's not a ton of teams that want to give up significant draft capital, the type it would take for the Browns to trade him and then also pay him at that position. So all that leads you to believe that it's going to be very much the Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt 1-2 punch in that Browns backfield again. They do, though, have numbers at the position. So whether it's Kareem Hunt or Dearness Johnson, I would think that Andrew Berry is going to be fielding some calls, and there might be an opportunity to make some type of move at that position here before the cutdown.
Tom, another concern that the Browns fan base have is the defensive tackle position. Is there any names that you can see being released on the 53 that the Browns can get, or is there any veterans out there that you can see the Browns going to get to ensure up this defensive tackle position for the season?
It's a great question because the two positions that always seem to have the most teams in need this time of year are defensive line and offensive line, and inevitably the supply is far short of the demand in that regard. So there's always the possibility that veterans are going to shake loose. It's just not as likely at that position because special teams doesn't factor as much in decisions at the defensive line position, where there's probably going to be a bunch of pretty good, like well-known veteran running backs who end up getting cut or traded down the stretch here. Just because if you're a third running back, you don't play special teams, you're not making the roster. You don't have that concern at defensive tackle. Nobody has enough depth at that position. So, without getting into, names, because off the top of my head, it's a little bit difficult to give you the correct ones. I would just say that's a difficult position to find guys, but, it's certainly always possible. You just don't know. It's based upon who's got numbers at what positions and who they decide to make available.
Yeah, I remember last year the Bengals, right before the season, traded for B.J. Hill from the Giants, who ended up having a really good year as their third D tackle, and eventually when what's his name? He used to be on the Browns. Got hurt.
Larry Ogunjobi.
Yeah, Ogunjobi got hurt. He became a starter. He played well. But you're right. It is rare that happens. But do you, besides Kareem Hunt and the guys we've mentioned, Kareem Hunt and Jimmy Garoppolo, is there any other big names, whether it's the Browns or not, any other team, that you think could be traded right here in the next week or two?
I can't tell you that. What do you want me to do here? I'm going to give you the whole list? Come on, man. I can't give away everything here 4 days out from the deadline.
What about
the NFL Network? I hear you.
What about Jalen Rager for the Eagles? Isn't he like a
Jalen Rager's a name that's come up plenty. That one's been out there for a year. It's just what he's a former first-round draft pick. He's going into year 3 here. Do you sell on him, at a cut rate.
What about
Somebody who, you evaluated him highly enough, you took him above Justin Jefferson. You obviously, believed in the guy and the speed and the differences that he could make in the game. That's always a tough one for GMs. It's just you get to a certain point with players and this is the best we're going to be able to do. I mean, the Eagles just traded J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, another receiver that they drafted highly, and they traded him for Ugo Amadi, who they then traded again to the Titans for a late-round pick flop in 2024. Jalen Reagor's not at that level yet where it's going to be a giveaway for nothing. They're still going to be looking for value. It's a tough player to get value for, but there are a bunch of teams that need wide receivers right now. And so, whether it's teams like the Bears, who are, I went through that camp and they clearly have needs to upgrade the talent level at that position, or somebody, they already traded for N'Keal Harry there, another guy who didn't work out as a former first-round pick. That's a position where everybody's going to be looking. Everybody's trying to trade, and this happens every year, like their sixth wide receiver. But that doesn't really move the needle for a whole lot of people. Everybody's looking for, can we actually get like a starting caliber receiver? Denzel Mims' agent just requested a trade. Mims is a really talented guy. He was a second-round pick a couple of years ago. For whatever reason, the Jets coaching staff just hasn't put him on the field. A guy like that comes in, but you're not thinking, okay, if you're the Browns and you trade for Denzel Mims, that he's stepping in and he's making a difference right away. That's like a developmental type of thing. You see far more of those types of players at this time of year than the star types.
Tyvis asked you about Lamar Jackson. I want to look at the other two quarterback situations in this division because we've talked about the Browns, we've talked about the Ravens. Obviously, Joe Burrow had the appendectomy before the preseason and missed, early camp. Where is he right now? And as for the Steelers, you hear, maybe Kenny Pickett. I don't know. What do you make of the Steelers? Who do you expect it to be Trubisky? So what do you think about that?
Joe Burrow feels good. From the start, I was there, I think, the day after he had the appendectomy, and everybody said it didn't seem like it was something where you're going to have an overly complicated type of a recovery. They expected him back well before week one, and sure enough, a couple weeks later, back on the practice field. And he said it the other day, he thinks he could go out and play, 11 on 11 right now. So really no concern that I've heard with Joe Burrow. In terms of what's happening in Pittsburgh, Mitch Trubisky still is at the front of the line here going into this final week of the preseason, but Kenny Pickett's coming fast. I mean, he's played really well to this point. You see, he started like 50 games in college playing a pro style offense. He was the most pro ready quarterback in this draft. It's also just one of those deals where if you go to Kenny Pickett right now in week one, you can't bench Kenny Pickett.
Right.
That ship has kind of sailed. If you start with Mitch Trubisky and then you get halfway through the season and you go, okay, now we're going to Kenny Pickett, that's a way easier transition. Kenny Pickett's the future for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but if they had to play a game right now, my belief is Mitch Trubisky would still be the guy.
Mikey, McNuggets, you got something?
Yeah, Tom, a name here in Cleveland that still moves the needle is Baker Mayfield. I know you covered the entire league, so is the revenge game between Baker and this Browns defense the number one thing you're looking forward to in week one of the NFL season?
It's up there. I mean, you got Russell Wilson versus the Seahawks too, which is going to be pretty good. But I'll say this for Baker, and I know there's a lot of people who have different opinions about Baker for a lot of different reasons. I will take a pissed off Baker Mayfield on my team for 1 year. If you're the Panthers and you're trying to win, and there's at least some level of concern you would think about, is this program heading in the right direction? How many games do we have to win to make sure we can carry on here? I'll take Baker going out if he can stay healthy to play that 1 year, chip on the shoulder, whatever cliche you want to use, because that's really always been a part of his makeup. It's hard to do that when you're in Cleveland and you're the number one overall pick. We saw him play, really good football in 2020 and lead them to their first, lead the Browns to their first playoff win in decades, but then everything that happened last year, the way that things ended, the disrespect that Baker Mayfield thought that he felt from the Cleveland Browns, all of which, whatever he says going into this game, that he's going to come out and he's going to play pissed off. If you're the Browns, you're hoping he plays too pissed off and starts handing you the football. But I'll take the guy being motivated and coming in and wanting to win, not just this game, but through this whole season. Because let's be honest, he can make himself a lot of money here if he plays well for the Panthers. Then he's in a situation he's on the option where he could get franchise tagged, or potentially he could get to the free agent market and cash in if he's playing well.
Well, Tom, I'll just say this, that so we've got a lot of varied opinions in Cleveland, and I'm looking at the body of work, because I look at the body of work. Baker Mayfield is his own worst enemy. He really is. Right? And if you look at his body of work doesn't say I'm a standout here. I mean, he's just an average guy. Look at his numbers. right? And we can always go to one year where he had a series of good games. But if you look at the total body of work, right, it is just basic. It's just a basic guy. And so for us here in this market, I think we are really waiting for this first game because I don't care if he got 10 chips on his shoulders. I'm going to see you here on this first day. Yes, I am. Right? Because we got some scores to settle here. There's some issues to settle here. Right? And he left here. He divided the locker room, Tom, here. It's not, that's hard to do, right? When you're the number one,
the conversations across the line, the conversations across the line between Baker and the Browns are going to be slightly different than the conversations across the line between Russell Wilson and the Seahawks. Just a wild game. The language,
I'd say
every part of it, maybe just a little bit different, but it's going to be fun. I mean, there's so much. We've been looking forward to so many things. I feel like, I've said this before, this felt like the longest NFL offseason in history. I've covered the league for 20 years, and so much happened in March. You know, the coaching cycle went later. It went all the way into February with some of those hires. Then you have things happening later in the process, like Bruce Arians and Sean Payton. You had all those trades, like 10 different trades, all involving Pro Bowl players. Then you still had the draft. Like, all that stuff, I feel like we've played 5 seasons since then. We've still not seen Russell Wilson in a Broncos uniform, Devontae Adams in a Raiders uniform, Carson Wentz in a Commanders uniform, Baker Mayfield in a Panthers uniform. I'm just happy, guys. Like, we're finally going to get to actually see the games and have something new to talk about, like, just so we can kind of move this whole thing forward. And then guess what? We're going to get to 10 other, controversies and other things that we're talking about by the time week 1's over.
Tom, great stuff, man. We appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for joining us.